Christmas Eve at the Henderson family house always followed the same script. Mom would spend weeks transforming our suburban home into something that belonged in a magazine spread, complete with professional decorations, catered appetizers, and enough champagne to stock a small restaurant. Dad would invite his business associates and their families, turning what should have been an intimate holiday into a networking event disguised as family time. And I would sit in the corner, watching my parents perform their annual tradition of reminding everyone within earshot that I was the family's greatest disappointment. This year felt different though. Not because anything had changed about their expectations or my apparent failures, but because I'd finally reached a point where their opinions couldn't touch me anymore. At 26, after 3 years of careful planning and strategic silence, I was ready for them to learn exactly who their disappointment daughter had become. The evening started predictably enough. I arrived at 6:30 wearing my usual thrift store sweater and worn jeans, carrying a small gift bag that contained homemade cookies for my 12-year-old cousin Ashley. She was the only family member who'd ever shown genuine interest in my life, probably because she was too young to understand that I was supposed to be the cautionary tale. "There's our little artist," Mom announced to the room as I walked in, her voice carrying that particular tone of affectionate condescension she'd perfected over the years. "Still pursuing your little craft projects, I see." The assembled guests, a mix of Dad's colleagues from the investment firm and Mom's country club friends, turned to look at me with polite interest. I'd been introduced as the artistic one so many times that most of them probably assumed I spent my days finger painting or making jewelry from bottle caps. What they didn't know was that my little craft projects had generated over $3 million in revenue in the past 18 months. "Hi, Mom," I said, accepting her air-kiss greeting. "You look beautiful. Is that the new Chanel dress?" "It is. Your father insisted I treat myself. Business has been so good this year." She gestured toward Dad, who was holding court near the fireplace, regaling a group of associates with stories about his latest real estate acquisitions. Business had indeed been good for Dad. Good enough that he'd bought Mom the $4,000 dress, the new BMW in the driveway, and the vacation home in Aspen they'd been posting about on social media all fall. What he didn't know was that his good business year had been largely subsidized by investments I'd been making in his company through a shell corporation I'd established 2 years earlier. My brother Michael appeared at my elbow, carrying a crystal tumbler filled with what I recognized as Dad's expensive scotch. At 28, Michael had perfected the art of looking successful while accomplishing remarkably little. He worked at a marketing firm downtown, lived in a luxury apartment paid for by our parents, and drove a car that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Well, he said, looking me up and down with practiced disdain. "The prodigal daughter returns. Still shopping at Goodwill, I see. Still living in Mom and Dad's financial shadow, I see," I replied sweetly. His expression darkened, but before he could respond, our cousin Ashley bounded over with the enthusiasm only 12-year-olds could muster for family gatherings. "Katie, I didn't know you were coming. Did you bring any of your art stuff? I told my friends at school about those paintings you showed me last summer and they want to see pictures." "I brought you something even better," I said, handing her the gift bag. "I made these myself." Ashley opened the bag and pulled out a tin of decorated sugar cookies, each one hand-painted with intricate designs that had taken me hours to complete. Her face lit up with genuine delight, the first authentic emotion I'd seen all evening. "These are amazing. They look like tiny masterpieces." She held up a cookie decorated to look like a miniature Van Gogh Starry Night. "How do you even do this?" "Lots of practice," I said, watching Mom approach with that familiar look of patient tolerance she wore whenever Ashley showed interest in my work. "Ashley, honey, don't get too excited," Mom said gently. "They're just cookies. Katie's very creative, but let's not make a big fuss. Just cookies." I'd spent 40 hours over the past 2 weeks creating edible art that could have been displayed in a gallery, but to Mom they were just cookies. The same way my paintings were just little pictures, my sculptures were just playthings, and my entire career was just Katie's art phase. What Mom didn't understand was that my art phase had evolved into something considerably more substantial than weekend crafts. Over the past 3 years, I'd built a business empire that spanned fine art sales, commissioned sculptures, licensing deals for my designs, and a recently launched line of luxury home decor items that had been featured in Architectural Digest and House Beautiful. But I'd kept all of that carefully hidden from my family. Not because I was ashamed of my success, but because I'd learned early that sharing good news with people who expected you to fail was an exercise in futility. They'd either find ways to diminish your achievements or take credit for enabling them. Better to succeed quietly and reveal the truth when the moment was right. That moment was tonight. The gift exchange began around 8 o'clock, following the same hierarchy it had maintained for as long as I could remember. Dad and Mom exchanged expensive presents that had clearly been chosen by personal shoppers. Michael received the latest tech gadgets and designer accessories. Ashley got everything on her Christmas list plus several items she hadn't thought to ask for. And then everyone turned to look at me expectantly. "I'm sorry," I said, settling deeper into the armchair I'd claimed in the corner. "I can't afford gifts this year. Money's been really tight." The silence that followed was deafening. Not because anyone was surprised. My financial struggles were a well-established family narrative, but because I'd stated it so matter-of-factly in front of Dad's business associates. Mom's cheeks flushed pink with embarrassment. "Katie, surely you could have managed something small. Even homemade gifts show effort." "I brought Ashley cookies," I pointed out. "I meant for everyone," Mom said, her voice taking on that edge it always carried when she felt I was reflecting poorly on the family's image. "This is Christmas, honey. It's about showing appreciation for family." "And I do appreciate family," I said calmly. "I just can't afford to show it financially right now." Dad cleared his throat from across the room. "Katie, if money is such a problem, maybe it's time to consider more practical career options. There are plenty of entry-level positions available for someone willing to work hard." Entry-level positions. I was sitting in a room full of people who considered Dad a successful businessman, listening to him suggest I find entry-level work, while he remained completely unaware that I'd been one of his company's largest investors for the past 2 years. "You know what your problem is?" Mom continued, warming to a familiar theme. "You've never learned the value of money because you've never had to earn it properly. Art is a lovely hobby, but it's not a career." "Mom's right," Michael chimed in, clearly enjoying the opportunity to lecture me in front of an audience. "You're 26 years old. Most people your age have established careers, savings accounts, retirement plans. You're still playing dress-up with finger paints." I looked around the room at the assembled guests, most of whom were politely trying to pretend they weren't witnessing a family intervention disguised as a Christmas celebration. These were successful business people, the kind who understood financial planning, investment strategies, and wealth management. They were about to get a very interesting education in assumptions. "You're absolutely right," I said, standing up and smoothing down my thrift store sweater. "I should probably check my finances more carefully." "Mom, speaking of finances, how are yours doing? When's the last time you actually looked at your bank balance?" Mom laughed. That particular laugh she reserved for my most ridiculous suggestions. Typical. The family disappointment strikes again. "Katie, honey, your father and I are doing perfectly well financially. We don't need to check our balance like college students." Dad nodded in agreement, his expression patient but condescending. "We've been managing money since before you were born, sweetheart. I think we understand our financial situation." "I'm sure you do," I said pleasantly. "But humor me. When did you last actually log into your bank account and look at the numbers?" "This is ridiculous," Mom said, but I could see uncertainty creeping into her expression. "Why would you even ask that?" "Just curious," I said. "You seem so confident about your financial situation. I'd love to see that confidence in action." The room had gone completely quiet. Dad's business associates were watching this exchange with the fascination people reserve for car accidents, unable to look away but uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. "Fine," Mom said, pulling out her phone with an exaggerated sigh. "If it will end this nonsense, I'll show you exactly how wrong you are about our finances." She opened her banking app, entered her password, and waited for the account information to load. I watched her face carefully as the numbers appeared on her screen. The color drained from her cheeks so quickly I thought she might faint. "That can't be right," she whispered, staring at her phone. "This has to be some kind of mistake." "What is it?" Dad asked, moving closer to look at her screen. "The savings account," Mom said, her voice barely audible. It's almost empty. The checking account too. How is that possible?" Dad grabbed the phone from her hands, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm as he saw the numbers. This has to be an error. Call the bank. Someone's made a mistake. Maybe check your credit card balance too, I suggested helpfully. With shaking hands, Mom opened her credit card app. The number that appeared on the screen made her gasp audibly. $43,000, she read in a voice that cracked with disbelief. I owe $43,000. But that's impossible. I pay the balance every month. Do you? I asked gently. Or do you pay the minimum and assume Dad's covering the rest? The silence that followed was profound. I could see the pieces clicking into place in both their minds. Months of unchecked spending, assumptions about automatic payments, credit card bills that someone else was supposed to be handling. The vacation house, Dad said suddenly. The mortgage payments. I thought you were handling those. I thought you were handling them, Mom replied. And the BMW payment? I thought that was coming out of the business account. I watched my parents realize in real time that their comfortable lifestyle had been built on a foundation of assumptions and miscommunications. They'd been living like wealthy people while their actual finances crumbled beneath them. This is impossible, Michael said, though his voice lacked conviction. There has to be an explanation. There is an explanation, I said calmly. You've been spending more money than you've been making. For quite a while, actually. That's ridiculous, Dad snapped. The business has been doing incredibly well. The best year we've ever had. Has it? I asked. Or have you just been assuming it was doing well because money kept appearing when you needed it? The look of dawning horror on his face told me he was beginning to understand. Dad, I continued, when's the last time you actually looked at your business financials? Not the summary reports your accountant sends, but the actual detailed statements. The accountant handles all that. James has been managing the books for 15 years. And you trust James completely? Of course I trust him. He's family. James, Dad's brother-in-law who'd been managing the company's finances since before I was born. The same James who'd been embezzling money for the past 3 years, thinking no one would notice because Dad never looked at the detailed reports. The same James whose theft I'd discovered 6 months ago when I'd started investigating the company's finances as part of my investment strategy. You might want to call James, I suggested. Ask him about some of the recent transactions. Dad fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking as he dialed. The conversation that followed was brief and devastating. James wasn't answering his phone, and when Dad tried calling the office, he discovered that James hadn't been seen in 2 weeks. He's gone, Dad said numbly. The office manager says he cleaned out his desk and hasn't been back since. And the money? Mom asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer. Gone too. The Christmas party had transformed into a wake. Dad's business associates sat in stunned silence, realizing they were witnessing the collapse of a family's financial foundation in real time. Mom clutched her phone like a lifeline, staring at the devastating numbers on her screen. We're ruined, she whispered. The house, the cars, the vacation property. We can't afford any of it. Actually, I said, settling back into my chair, that's not entirely true. Every head in the room turned toward me. You can't afford any of it, I clarified. But it's not going to be a problem. Katie, Dad said, his voice heavy with exhaustion, this isn't the time for optimism. We're looking at bankruptcy. Foreclosure. We could lose everything. You're not going to lose everything, I said calmly. Because I'm not going to let that happen. Honey, Mom said gently, I know you want to help, but this isn't something you can fix with good intentions. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. Actually, we're talking about $847,000 in combined debt, I said, consulting my own phone. Plus the $320,000 that James embezzled from the business over the past 3 years. The specificity of those numbers got everyone's attention. How do you know that? Michael asked suspiciously. Because I've been tracking your finances for the past 6 months, I said simply. Ever since I discovered the embezzlement. You've been what? Dad's voice was sharp with confusion and anger. Tracking your finances. Monitoring the embezzlement. Documenting James's theft. Preparing for this conversation. I stood up and walked to the center of the room, making sure I had everyone's complete attention. 6 months ago, I hired a private investigator to look into James's activities because some of the business transactions didn't make sense. We discovered that he'd been systematically stealing money for 3 years, covering his tracks by manipulating the summary reports you relied on. Why didn't you tell us? Mom demanded. Because I needed time to fix it, I said. And because I knew you wouldn't believe me without overwhelming proof. From my purse I pulled out a thick folder and set it on the coffee table. Complete documentation of James's embezzlement. Bank records, transaction histories, forged documents. Everything you need for criminal prosecution and civil recovery. Dad grabbed the folder with shaking hands, flipping through pages of evidence that painted a clear picture of systematic theft and financial manipulation. This is incredibly detailed, he said after several minutes. Professional-level investigation. I hired the best, I said. Former FBI financial crimes specialist. Cost me $40,000, but it was worth every penny. $40,000? Mom stared at me in disbelief. Katie, where did you get $40,000? The same place I got the money to cover your mortgage payments for the past 6 months, I said calmly. The silence that followed was absolute. You've been paying our mortgage? Dad's voice was barely a whisper. And your credit card bills. And the BMW payment. And the vacation house mortgage. And about 15 other monthly expenses that you thought were being covered by business income that was actually being stolen. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, turning the screen so everyone could see the balance displayed there. $3.7 million, I said simply. Current liquid assets, not counting investment portfolios or business valuations. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. I watched my family process the implications while Dad's business associates tried to hide their amazement. $3.7 million, Michael repeated slowly. You have $3.7 million. In checking and savings, yes. Total net worth is closer to $12 million, but most of that's tied up in real estate and business investments. $12 million, Mom said faintly. You have $12 million. I have $12 million, I confirmed. From my little art phase. The transformation in the room was instantaneous and complete. Every person who'd been looking at me with pity or condescension suddenly saw me differently. I wasn't the family disappointment anymore. I was the family's salvation. How? Dad asked, his voice filled with awe and confusion. How did you make $12 million from art? The same way anyone makes money, I said. I identified a market need, developed products to meet that need and scaled the business intelligently. I walked over to the mantelpiece, where one of my paintings hung in a simple frame, a landscape piece I'd given Mom 3 years earlier. She'd hung it in a corner where guests wouldn't notice it, treating it like a child's crayon drawing. This painting, I said, pointing to it, was my first commission sale. The buyer paid $15,000 for it. $15,000? Mom's voice cracked with disbelief. For that painting? For that painting. It was featured in a gallery show in New York, where a collector saw it and commissioned 5 more pieces at $25,000 each. Those pieces led to licensing deals with 3 major home decor companies. The licensing deals led to product lines that are now sold in over 400 stores nationwide. I could see them trying to reconcile the struggling artist narrative they'd maintained with the reality of what I'd actually built. The sculpture series I completed last year? I continued. 9 pieces commissioned by a hotel chain for their luxury properties. $180,000 per piece. Plus ongoing royalties. $180,000, Michael said numbly. Per piece. Per piece. The photography collection sold to a tech company for their corporate headquarters brought in another $300,000. The textile designs I licensed to that furniture company you see advertised on TV? Those generate about $40,000 per month in passive income. With each revelation, I watched my family's understanding of reality shift more dramatically. The little craft projects they'd dismissed for years had generated more wealth than Dad's investment firm had ever seen. But you dress like... Mom gestured vaguely at my thrift store outfit. Like someone who understands that expensive clothes don't create wealth, I finished. I dress modestly because I choose to, not because I have to. And you live in that tiny apartment, Michael added weakly. I live in a tiny apartment because it's convenient to my studio space and I don't need a lot of room, I said. I also own the building it's in, plus the art gallery on the ground floor and the coffee shop next door. The revelations were coming too fast for them to process. Each new piece of information forced them to recalibrate everything they thought they knew about my life and capabilities. You own a building, Dad said slowly. In downtown. I own 3 buildings in downtown, I corrected. Plus a warehouse space where I run art classes for underprivileged kids, and a small manufacturing facility where we produce the licensed products. Ashley spoke up for the first time since the conversation had started. You have employees? 47 employees across all the businesses, I said, smiling at her. Including 5 other artists who work on commissions and product development. Ashley looked at me like I'd suddenly revealed I was a superhero. Which, given her family's previous understanding of my life, wasn't far from the truth. Katie, Mom said, and her voice was small and uncertain, why didn't you tell us about any of this? It was the question I'd been waiting for. The one that would determine whether this conversation led to reconciliation or permanent estrangement. Because you never asked, I said simply. In 3 years of building this business, not one of you ever showed genuine interest in what I was doing. You assumed I was failing because failure fit your narrative about who I was supposed to be. The accusation hung heavy in the room. No one could deny it because it was objectively true. Every conversation about my career had been prefaced with assumptions about my limitations and their certainty about my inevitable failure. When I got my first gallery showing, I invited everyone, I continued. Michael said he was busy. Mom said gallery openings weren't her thing. Dad said he'd try to stop by but never did. I remember that, Ashley said quietly. I wanted to go, but Mom said it would be boring. When I got featured in Art Monthly magazine, I sent everyone copies. No one mentioned reading the article. When I won the Regional Artists Award, I called to share the news. Dad asked if there was any money involved, and when I said it was just recognition, he said congratulations and changed the subject. Each example was a small knife twist, but necessary. They needed to understand that their dismissal hadn't been casual oversight. It had been systematic devaluation of everything I'd accomplished. So I stopped sharing, I said. I stopped trying to include you in my successes because it was clear you weren't interested unless those successes aligned with your expectations. But honey, Mom said, tears starting to form in her eyes, we would have been proud. We would have celebrated with you. Would you have? I asked gently. Or would you have found ways to minimize the achievements? Suggested I was getting lucky? Warned me not to get my hopes up? Reminded me that art isn't a stable career. She couldn't answer because we both knew what her response would have been. The question now, I said, is what happens next? It was a loaded question. They needed my help. That much was clear. Their financial situation was catastrophic, and without intervention, they'd lose everything they'd worked to build. But help came with conditions, and those conditions would fundamentally change our family dynamics. We need your help, Dad said quietly. I hate admitting that, but it's true. Without your help, we'll lose the house, the business, everything. I know, I said. And I'm willing to help. But not unconditionally. What do you want? Michael asked, and I could hear the wariness in his voice. I want respect, I said simply. I want acknowledgement of what I've accomplished. I want to be included in family decisions that affect everyone. And I want the dismissive comments and condescending attitudes to stop. Done, Mom said immediately. I'm not finished, I continued. I also want Dad to step back from day-to-day business operations and let me restructure the company properly. The embezzlement happened because there were no financial controls in place. That changes now. Dad winced but nodded. Whatever you think is best. And Michael, I said, turning to my brother, you're going to earn your place in this family's financial future. No more handouts. No more trust fund lifestyle. You want to benefit from the family's wealth, you contribute to building it. What does that mean? He asked nervously. It means you're going to work for me, I said. Learning the business from the ground up. Proving you can create value instead of just consuming it. The transformation in Michael's expression was fascinating to watch. For the first time in our adult lives, he was looking at me as someone with power over his future rather than someone beneath his concern. And if I refuse, he asked, then you find your own way in the world. I said calmly. Your choice. The room was quiet as everyone processed the new reality. The family hierarchy had completely inverted in the span of an hour. The person they dismissed as the failure was now the person who controlled their financial future. There's one more thing, I said, pulling an envelope from my purse. Mom, this is for you. She opened the envelope with trembling hands and pulled out a check made out for $50,000. What's this for? She whispered. Christmas gifts, I said. Since I told you I couldn't afford them. The check represented more money than she'd ever held at one time, but the gesture meant something beyond the dollar amount. It was proof that I could have afforded elaborate gifts for everyone. I'd simply chosen not to participate in the family's gift-giving competition. Katie, she said, tears flowing freely now. I'm so sorry. We've been terrible to you. Dismissive and condescending and blind to what you were achieving. We all have been, Dad added. You've accomplished something extraordinary, and instead of celebrating it, we've been treating you like a charity case. I don't need apologies, I said. I need different behavior moving forward. You'll have it, Mom promised. Whatever you need from us, you'll have it. I looked around the room at my family, flawed, proud, and finally humbled enough to see me clearly. This wasn't the Christmas celebration any of us had planned, but it was the conversation we'd needed to have for years. All right then, I said, settling back into my chair. Let's talk about how we're going to rebuild this family's financial foundation. And this time, everyone's going to know exactly what's happening with the money. As the evening progressed, we outlined plans for restructuring Dad's business, implementing proper financial controls, and establishing new family dynamics based on mutual respect rather than assumed hierarchy. It would take time to rebuild trust and establish new patterns, but for the first time in years, I felt optimistic about our family's future. The best part was watching Ashley's face as she realized her struggling artist cousin was actually a successful businesswoman. She spent the rest of the evening asking detailed questions about art, business, and what it took to build something meaningful from scratch. Maybe she'd be the next family member to surprise everyone with what she was capable of achieving. As I prepared to leave that night, Mom pulled me aside for a private conversation. Katie, she said, I need you to know how proud I am of you. Not just for the money, but for the strength it took to succeed despite our lack of support. Thank you, I said. That means more than you know. And I need you to know, she continued, that we're going to do better. Be better. You deserved our support and encouragement all along, and you'll have it from now on. I hugged her, really hugged her for the first time in years, and felt the possibility of rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine understanding. Sometimes the best Christmas gift you can give your family is the truth about who you really are. Even when that truth forces everyone to reconsider everything they thought they knew about success, failure, and what it means to support the people you love.